Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
so
Thank you.
kita share dulu, present.
All
Alright.
right. My screen visible to everyone?
Yes, very clear.
Okay. So, good morning to everyone, to the students and my colleague. So, to begin with, so today we're going to look into culture mapping. Well, this is just another term of like site studies, where this lecture will be focusing on how you're going to map your site when you go to your site studies, right? So, okay, so why do you actually have to do the site mapping? Okay, it's actually looking into the importance of the mappings towards the project that you are going to propose in your design letter. Okay, so well, there's a lot of factors or uh, the core that we are looking at, which is we are looking into the space, the activities, and also the users. Okay, to propose our project. But under the space, there's one element that we are looking at, which is the cultural impact. So this is the focus of the culture mapping. Definitely, you have to go through various part or elements of the mapping, but this is the highlight of it. So why the importance of this mapping is actually to look into the quality of the project in regards to the place that we select for our site. All right, so this lecture will be divided into three parts. Okay, part one is more like the introductions of the terminology that being used. Part two is the process, and part three is the example of the site mapping. All right, so let's I introduce to let me introduce you to the terms of the placemaking. Okay, and what are the role of the placemaking in planning. Okay, so before any settlement exists in a certain places or a certain area or certain place, okay, there's need to have two kind of like elements, which is the natural environments and the humans. So without these two pillars or without these two elements, there's no such thing as the term human settlement. Okay, so the human settlement is actually the result of the reciprocals between the peoples and particular given environment. So the humans going to develop the space based on the needs of that particular human needs and that particular area. Okay, so the process of the evolutions of the human settlements or the area is based on the adaptations, the problem solving, the innovations, and also the co-recreations of this the place. Okay, which to suit the human needs and also the natural environment availability of the site. Right. So the placemaking is actually to explain the dynamic process by which people interact with and mold the environment over the period of time for various coexisting function. Okay, so for instance, like if the place is not really fully developed, so you know, like people will need to think of something, how to create the place which not really which underdeveloped. Okay, what they have to do in order for them to survive in that particular place. So for instance, they have to create a shelter, you know, to make sure that they can live in that particular place without any harm of the weather, of the climates, or even for from the animals, the wild animals, etc., etc. So this is the elements that why the placemaking is existed. Okay, meaning that you have to make the place its more livelihood, which is you know which is more suitable for the human being to live in that sense. So so in the mapping itself, we are looking into the three dimensions or three area, which is we are looking or we studying about the environment dimensions, academic dimensions, and also the social dimensions. which I will explain it to you in detail later. So under the environment dimensions, what you need to look at is the natural physical environments and resource that human directly depend on, which is the man-made, the built, the planted, and also the, for instance, like mine, you know, they have to modify a shelter, security, sustenance, goods and services, meaning that whatever resource, whatever uh, uh, resource that available on that particular site, which the human can make fully utilize the resource to make sure that they can have a better living kind of living space for them to be. And in terms of the economic dimensions, what we need to study is actually the activities that performed by the individuals, families, or the community of that particular site. Maybe you know, like they produce a goods based on the resource that they have from the environment dimensions. Okay, so for instance, I give you an example. Like for instance, in somewhere in Indonesia, for instance. So Indonesia have a lot of you know, like natural resource, like for example bamboo, rotan, and whatever not. So how they can produce the goods from that particular resource. So everything was like connected from one dot to another dot, meaning that this is the reason why without the natural resource of the place, the economic dimension might not, works well because they don't have any resource for them to work with. And the social dimensions is looking into the socials and also the political interactions of the place. For instance, like the belief, the ideologies, the myth, and also the religious aspect of the place. So these are the three major things that you guys have to focus on when you do the mapping, the site mapping. All right. So the role of the culture placemaking and planning. So why it is necessary for you to do the placemaking, or to understand the place. Okay. So basically, it's begin with the space to a place. So what is the difference between these terms, which is the space and the place? Okay, so the place is more looking into the materiality, locations, and the meaning, meaning that it's involved with the tangible and also the intangible factors of the place, meaning that the space, it could be any space, it could be anywhere in this world, but the place, it's kind of like bring you a different kind of like uh, meanings towards that particular place that you visited or you live in. So for instance, if you can look into the image here on the slide, which was taken back in 2013 in Georgia. So what triggered me or what interests me in this image is that how the setting of the markets to compare with what we have in Malaysia, in terms of the setting, in terms of the humans' behaviors, and also the way on how the markets runs in Jogja. So if you can see, like they have a proper building on the back side of this image for the market, but when you look into the setting outside the market, this is what make this market in Jogja slightly different from what we have in Malaysia. Well, you look into how the shading devices have been set up, to protect the people who sell the goods from the to give a shading from the natural sunlight and whatever not, and how they carry the goods, and how people rather to use more open space rather than they use the interior space of the market. So the special part of this, which you can see the behaviors and also the maturity of the place, which make this slightly different from the other parts of the other country in that sense. So this is why the placemaking is important for you to really understand the site that you're going to develop in regards. It's either you wanted to develop the urban planning, if you wanted to develop the architectures or even interior development in that sense. So you have to be able to justify on your own new proposal to that particular place, because it is important for you to really understand the place and to observe and to preserve whatever elements that it's kind of like important for that place, and also for the people who live in that particular place. So that is the reason why you have to the role of the placemaking in planning. Okay, so you have to really understand the elements of the place rather than you try to propose something more more alien to that place in that sense. So and then when we look into that specifically, and when we talk about the culture, what are the elements of the culture that we're going to map? Because culture is like very huge, or very very huge terms. So in the elements of the culture that we are looking into in this mapping is actually probably we look into the practices of the people on that side, the norms and the belief systems, and also the built environment, which is covered in terms of the architectural, interior spaces, materials of the buildings, systems, building system, etc., etc., and the product, the product and the services that being introduced in the place, the aesthetic expressions of the culture, and knowledge and the skill. So the reason why you have to study all these things is because you need to know who are the people in that particular place. Maybe when we look into, we always have these misconceptions of people who live in somewhere in suburb. They don't really well developed. We always think that we are more better than them in terms of the developments of our social culture and whatever not. But actually they are much more better than us. They are much more skillful than us. So in this mapping, these are the things that we are going to discover from our research or from our mapping. Okay, so we need to view as both process and also the product of the placemaking. Okay, so in this mapping, we are trying to identify how does the changes of the place has been made throughout the time uh, from the early stage of the development until now, and how does the adaptation has been applied into that places, what changes has been made and why it has been made. Everything need to be justified through your research and with the knowledge, experience, and the product. So maybe this is something that you have to highlight in your mapping. So for instance, again, I would like to bring you to maybe somewhere in Indonesia, when they have this kind of like, produce a lot of furniture, rotan furniture, for instance. So maybe you can use this as the main point, or the main core value of your project, meaning that you're going to use the locality expert and knowledge on the certain things. So this will be the highlight of your project, for instance. So based on the research that you have done from the making, so at least you propose something more related to the people who live in that particular place. So you are not like proposing something that out of nowhere that you think you are much more better than them, and then you try to impose something that not really significant to the place. So this is how to help you as a designers, or as an interior, to really be sensitive towards the place. So something to be pondered on. So Anyway, if I'm going too fast, please feel free to stop me in between, yeah, so that I can explain you further. Well, in terms of the culture elements, we have, like I said, we have two elements, which is the tangibles and also the intangible. So the tangible is something that we can measure, something that we can observe from our research, or findings from the interviews, observations, site observation, mapping, etc., etc. So it's something that we can measure. But in terms of the intangible, it's something that something that we need to in-depth research. In that sense, we need to really understand the site, which is we have to talk to the people to discover the intangible elements. For instance, here like the history. So what happened before? What are the sentimental value of this place? Okay. And then we need to identify the identities of the place. So what make that particular place that you choose, like for instance in Chinatown, for instance. So what are the identity of the Chinatowns? So what are the identity of the Chinatown different from what we have in KL, in Malaysia, and what make the Chinatown difference in other, in Thailand or whatever, not, so what are so special about this place to compare with others? And also, when we talk about the skills, like I said just now, so maybe on that certain place that you choose, they have a very, hidden germs, for instance, a specialties that the local people have in hand. So you have to kind of like really investigate and look into to this, to actually to really understand the place making process. Okay, so you need to really understand that before planning, before the future planning. And then when we talk about the the placemaking, it's always have to we always can relate that with the ecology. Ecology is something that the chain, like the change that make the place is more sustainable, or more yeah. So it's kind of like it needs to be balanced. So we need to look into what are the elements that involve with the ecological perspective of the place. Okay, so in terms of the cultural ecology, ways in which the culture and cultural changes is induced by the human adaptations to the environment. So again, if you look into the image on the right side of the slide, where it was taken somewhere in Indonesia, where I'm in the train from Bandung to Jakarta. I took the trains like I think it's around 4 hours train. I can't remember the durations, but it is really interesting to look into how much nature that available in Indonesia, and how does the changes have been made. Yeah, the handmade structure has been made to suit the needs of the people to travel from one place to another place. And then, so this is something, you don't want to be more focusing on certain development. For instance, like you just care about the development of the city rather than you look into the importance of the preservations of the nature, right? So this is the way on how you can look back, and the way something that you can evaluate is either your development. It's kind of like to focus on development or what. So this is something that you can justify through the research and also the mapping that you have done. So yeah, so in ecology of the place, we are looking into three aspects, which is the place, the use, and the people. So all these three elements are something not can be compromised, meaning that you have to make sure that whatever development that you do, it needs to be balanced out between these three elements. So for instance, like the place, what are the things that we are talking about is actually the, uh, the developments of the building, the architecturals, and also the natural environments. And the use is the use of place and material resource of human needs and wants, and people, knowledge, skill, expression, norm, meaning, system, and value. So like I said, every placer, they have their own kind of like niche or their own expertise, their own specialties, and etc. You just imagine if, let's say, you study on any, your site is on any fishing village or any suburban area where you think, oh, I don't care, I wanted to, create some another Kuala Lumpur in that particular area. So without thinking of these, people that are available on the site, and also the resource that are available on the site. So with that out of consideration, you indirectly you destroying the place rather than you improve the place, rather than like you make good of the place. So then what are the purpose of the urbanization? What are the purpose of you trying to develop the place, right? So if you ignore the people who there, the system that they have there. So these are the importance of the mapping, to really ensure that you are developing, or you are proposing something that more significant and more valuables to the place, not only the place but the people, and also the use of that place. Right, so in the dimension that I mentioned earlier, so under the environmental dimensions, we are looking into the buildings, the blue-green spaces, planted, mine, any specialties of that place need to be highlighted and need to be really, look at. And in terms of the social dimensions, we are looking into the people, their organization, the system contributing the cohesions, identity, dignity, and well-being, etc., etc. And the economic is we are looking into the activities, assets, resource that support sustainability or the sustainable livelihood of the place. Okay, so these are the way of how cultural play in an important role of the mapping, or how to make how to look into the placemaking particularly. So far, any questions before I proceed to the part 2? Is everyone clear?
Yes.
Yeah. Right. Good. So from the understanding of the importance of the placemaking, so we move forward to mapping. So what is mapping? Mapping is like a tools. You can name it whatever you want. It can be culture mapping, it can be site mapping, it can be I don't know, place mapping and whatever not. But to begin with, mapping is used for us to indicate or to really identify and to analyze on the certain area. Okay, so basically in mapping, we trying to analyze the people, the place, the activities, and the objects in relation to the notions of time, space, distance, frequency, and to provide both metaphorical and functional informations of the the relational patterns, hierarchies, category movements, flows in our world, meaning whatever like changes have been made, the significance of the places. So these are the tools that we are going to use to enhance or to explain about our studies. So it's not limited to the map, the site. The way on how we can, looking into the mapping, we can do the collage to explain about the histories, what happened, the history of the site, what happened to the social economies and the people, how does the changes affect the entire development, etc., etc. So there's a lot of way you can look into. And then when we talk about the culture mappings, as explained earlier, it's always involved with humans and environments, because based from these two elements, that is where the place is exists. It's need to have a contribution of these two elements. So there's a lot of opinions or definitions of this from the several people, which more or less it can be summarized, which the culture mapping should involve the histories of the site, the sociology, geography, economics, and also the architectural elements of this the place. Okay, so I like the quote here, which is diagnose before treatment, meaning that you really need to identify through mapping what is the initial issues or problem of the site before whatever proposal that you're going to propose. Like when you go to the clinic, when you go to the hospital, definitely doctor don't subscribe you with the medicines or treatments straight away. Definitely you need to be diagnosed. You need to be inspect in that sense. So the mapping is the process of you to diagnose the place. Sometimes we are really eager to look into the development without really understand what are the issues, what are the problems of the site to begin with. So it is not something that short sendiri, and this is really really important before you proceed to the next studio, which is the final year 3 studio, for you to come up with a good proposals or the good project. Yeah. So right. So under the culture mapping, there's a underlying factor that drive the placemaking. Okay, to give a rise to a unique culture product and expressions. So under the culture mappings, we like again, we look into the 3 dimension just now, and we need to look into the context analysis and also the diagnostic assessment. Okay, so from the mapping that you have done, you have to come up with what are the real issues of the place. Okay, that you think it need to be improvised, or it need to be improved, or need to be preserved on whatever justification that you have in mind. It need to be based on the diagnosis assessment that you have done. It's not something yang macam, oh, because I want this. There's no such thing as I want. It have to be why. What are the reasons you have to or you need to, okay, with the considerations from the diagnosis assessment. And then we're looking into the holistic and contextual planning solutions. Okay, so as a interior designer, definitely our scope is slightly kind of like smaller than the town planners and the architect itself, but it is also significant directly or indirectly to the scope of the interior project, where you can solve the issues maybe in terms of the economic factors or the social factors. Maybe like the place that you choose later, it's in an urban area, where there's a lot of issues with, there's no such thing as a social place. There's a lot of development which lacking considerations of the social activities in that particular place. So maybe you can propose some pocket space for the social activities which involve with your interior project. So it can be significant to that place because you propose something that really in need, to make sure that, again, you have to go back to the elements, which is the ecology of the place that I explained earlier. Okay, so what are the significance that the projects towards the place that you're going to propose? So that is the reason why you have to focus on the macro and also the micro studies or mapping of the site. Is that clear? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, so these are the kind of like the stages or the process that you have to go through when you do the mapping. Okay, so how you're going to start is actually you have to start with your desktop study first, meaning that you have to understand the historical, the regulatory, and legislative records, meaning that maybe your site that you choose as more they have a concern on the heritage building, for instance. So there's a lot of restriction, there's a lot of regulation that you have to kind of like paying attention on the before you start with any mapping. So you need to really understand the site. You have to really look into work on your desktop studies and understand the site. And then what you need to do after you do some background research, and then you have to engage with the community. Community here doesn't really focusing on only the people who live in that particular place, but also that people involved directly and indirectly to the place. So for instance, like a stakeholder, the authorities, the people, the tourists and whatever not. So these are just to get some ideas on what are the needs of this place, to give you some background ideas before you start mapping. At least you have kind of like information for you to work with whenever that you start to do your mapping. Okay, so at least you know what are the things that you should look into when you start to do your mapping. All right, so after you done interview or talk to the people, to the local, to the stakeholder, to the authorities, and then you can start with the site mapping, which you look into the elements of the cultures and so how you measure them um, based on whatever information that you have from the stage 1 and stage 2. And then after when you do the site mapping, then when you go back, then you have to do the site assessment and contextualizations. So this is the important part where you really need to identify which area or which context that you're going to cover, because we are not going to be ambitious. We're not looking into bigger issue. We are not looking into a bigger context, but you need to specify which you have more concern on that particular site. Okay, and then you need to start to establish area, like I said, and also you need to look into the ecology of the place. Okay, so then only after you get everything done, after discussion over discussion over discussion, then you can proceed with the planning directions, which is more significant towards the analysis, towards the diagnosis stage that you have done earlier. So in the mapping, what are the things that you need to look into is actually, I listed down 4 here, which is the asset mapping, resource mapping, concept mapping, and system mapping. So under the asset mapping, what we look into, this given an example of the fishing village, for instance. Yeah. So, so under the asset mapping, so the culture asset, which involved with tangible and also the intangible culture products, and the expressions that bring immediate benefits to the individuals or the group within the community. So for example, like they have some sort of like boat making occupations due to they need that to have a boat for them to do their everyday life, or like economic activities or whatever not. So and food made from marine products from whatever resort that they have, and also like the harvest festival, etc., etc. Anything that involve with that place, okay, the cultural asset. So This is what makes that place different from the others side of the fishing village, for instance. So, and the resource mapping, we are looking into the products that exist, which are important for the cultural productions and continuity. So, for instance, like natural coastlines and the oceans, the marine life, the shared community knowledge about the nature, occupational knowledge, etc., etc. So, this is something that you need to identify, or you need to know why is this kind of things, the resource need are important to be preserved in that sense. So any development that you're going to propose doesn't affect this, or any project that you propose should able to help to maintain, to preserve, or to make good of this resource, because without this resource, okay, your development are useless. Without this resource, there's no such thing as place anymore, because the place is already changed to something new. So the significance was not there. Yeah. And and what are the purpose of the development that you're trying to inject into that place? So that's something that you have to ponder and consider, and it should be available on your mapping. And then in terms of the concept, we are looking into more intangible, which is the belief, the values, the philosophies, the myth, the religions, and whatever not, and the system. System is very important in any mapping, in any developments, because we need to understand how does things works on site. How does the system works on that particular place? Okay. So how from the resource, from the asset, and from the resource and the concept, and how they actually produce things at the end of the day, which can contribute to the ecology of the places. Meaning that maybe you are living in this fishing village, so what you do is you do the fishing, right? So and then you out from the resource that you have, you produce a products, you produce the boat making, whatever assets, or whatever things that you've done, and then you at the end of the day, you try to sell the product outside, right? You try to import or export or whatever. So how does the system works in that particular space? So let's say if you found out in your mapping, there's one kind of like area which is lacking off, which not benefit to the people, to the community of that place. So that is the area that you should focus on. So contoh, like for instance, they're lacking of like economic part where they don't know how to sell the product. So your proposal should look into that particular area, right? So then that is why the diagnosis is very important. You know what you're going to solve. You know what is the real issues, rather than you trying to do something that the people doesn't need that at the first place. So yeah, so that is something that you have to consider while you are thinking of your proposal. And the outcome that that we expected from this mapping is actually to have some inventory of the culture assets and resource of the place, okay, and the characters of the culture, which kalau kita cakap pasal certain places, we can straight away, we can directly kind of like identify that place. Oh, place tu macam ni, Oh, when we talk about Bali, we straight away can like kind of like imagine how does Bali, in terms of the culture, in terms of the place, identity, and whatever not. When we talk about Thailand, we talk about Bangkok, or whatever not. So, so we are going to use that. We are going to use the culture mapping is to identify the characters of that area. Okay, and then we need to identify the conditions and the vitality of the cultural asset, resource, cultural subsystem, the site assessment of the site. Okay, and let's say you choose any place in suburban area, or even in the downtown area KL. So maybe there's some area of short lot has been abandoned for a long time. there must be a reason why it's abandoned in the first place. So using the site mapping, okay, you have to identify what are the real issues here. And the new program that you're going to propose, okay, is something that to respond to the issues of the site based on the mapping that you have done. Okay, and the last part will be the insight into how the site functions, the place ecology. So again, the ecologies of the place too is not something yang you boleh compromise, meaning that the three elements that I mentioned earlier should be together. It cannot be too focused on only one element. Right. So we're going to the next part on the procedure. Okay, on the procedures of how you can do the culture mapping. Like I said just now, you have to engage with the clients, the site, and you need to profile the site, and then you need to shape the project brief from whatever observations that you have done, and then you need to define the scope. Okay, so what are the things that you need to identify is the scale, okay, which later I think Ms. Adila will explain to you in terms of the scale area that you should cover. And then you need to identify the approach to mapping, which approach that you're going to use, again, the tools and the techniques, and you need to, at the end, and you need to set up the project management system, how you're going to run the mapping. Okay, so when we look into the scale of the mapping, we divide it into three parts here, which is the intimate scales, intermediate scale, and regional scale. So under intimate scales, we are looking into the immediate compound. So for instance, like the factory, house, garden, apartment block, etc. Some more specific buildings that you are looking at. And then the intermediate is actually we're looking into slightly bigger, which is we're looking into more like the neighborhood area of the site. Okay, and regional scales, we are mapping the larger cultural landscape or the regions around site. Okay, so if you can look into the diagram below here. So in terms of the building level mapping, you need to study, what you need to study is actually the building histories, the architecture, the condition, use and users, etc., etc. So for the site and street level, you need to study about the cultural landscape, okay, example building or streets, which what significance of the architectural style toward the culture of the place, right? And then for the town levels, looking into more bigger context, which you're trying to identify the assets, the resource, the culture characters, and so the ecology of the place. So, by having a types or skills of your research, then you can cover everything in your mapping, right? Doesn't have, so that you don't miss any important part of the mapping. All right, so what we do when we do the mapping, we have to do the integrated mapping, which mapping of the site from a multi-dimensional perspective. Again, go back to the dimension, which is the three-dimension environment, social and economic. You need to mapping the past events, experiences, archive documents, stories, memories from the peoples, etc., etc. And these are the kind of like how you determine the culture elements which need to be mapped. Okay, so under history, the tangible element or aspect, what you can study is actually the past environment, building monuments, artifact documents. So the intangible elements is the migration settlement pattern, use of activity in the past, memories, meaning, heritage value, etc., etc. So and the place for the tangible part, this is what you do lah for your site studies, like building, the structure, the natural environment, planter, public amenities, toilet, bins, street furniture, whatever that involved with the buildings that you need to cover. all right? And the intangible is the design aesthetic of the buildings, the ownership and the management, the well-being, you know, etc. etc. So this is how you can map, or what are the area that you should look into. So the importance of okay, I think I can skip this one. Right, so techniques. Later I will share you guys the slides so that I don't have to go too detail. All right, so at the end of the day, you need to kind of like come up with the system approach. Like I said, what are the approach that you wanted to propose to that site based on the mapping that you have done? Okay, so the system approach is to investigate and identify the interdependence variables and constituents, parts or elements that work together as a complex whole to form a particular system that is unique to the site and community. So this is where you start your project proposal. So this is where you understand the place itself and what are the contributions, or what are the you know, the propose that you're going to apply into the site. All right, and all this detail I will just share with you guys the slide so that you can refer to. Okay, so this is how you can do your SWOT analysis, which cover the three elements here. What are the significance of it towards your project proposals? Right, so these are the samples of this project of the culture mapping, which has been done in Campbell Street Markets, Georgetown. So how they start with the inspections and profiling the market site. So which area that you guys will look at, you know, so we need to do the site markings, and then stakeholder engagements. So who are the persons that they liaise with, which is the traders, the customers, the government agencies and visitors. So all the needs of each of the stakeholder are taken in consideration before whatever future programs or future proposal towards the market. Okay, so the goals and the objective of that is to record, to have a data recording, data synthesis, and data evaluations based on the three elements or three dimensions that has been explained earlier. All right, so this is how they do the mapping. Okay, so under the environment, and right, and manual data collection. So what are the tools that you're going to use? Well, these is all the terms that you can refer to. Okay, and these are the example on how they do the mapping. Okay, in terms of the data collections, what are the significance of recording the building facade, the histories of the building, which you know, does it significance to the site? Does it really, you know, significant to be preserved? You know, does it significance to be cooperate in a new development, etc., etc. So in terms of mapping space use, you know, for the site they go one by one. Okay, we go each unit of the market. And we identify the use of the space. So is it the space is used for the commercials, or commercial use of the street, commercial use of your house? So, you know, like I said, sometimes they more tend to sell the goods, I mean, at the open area rather than they open it on inside the unit, inside the store. So why? So you need to really investigate. Okay, so like how they arrange the goods that they sell, the methods, etc. So this is very important. It's because when you propose something, you know, you're trying to give a new kind of like idea to the place, but I mean, does the people who used to have this kind of like way on how they sell the goods, are they ready for the new adaptations to the new methods that from our side that we're going to propose in that sense? So even we study, I mean, the studies done looking into the flow of the users, and then in terms of the usage of this shop lot. Okay, so at the bottom, usually they open, and the ground floor they're using for a like makan place, and then on the top part they just use for the storage and whatever not. So there is a lot of observation required before whatever proposal that you're trying to looking at. Okay, after you've done individual mapping, then when you do the synthesis space use, you have to combine all the elements that you studied earlier into one mapping, into one plan mapping, so that you can look into the flow and the significance of it on your side. And then and you start to assess the site. So from the SWOT analysis and whatever not, and this is the summary, and then only you can propose whatever proposal that you have in mind, which I think definitely it will change your proposal from what you have earlier. After you do the mapping, definitely it will change because of you might have a different perspective of that particular site. So with that, thank you very much for lending your ears. Thank you. Stop.
All right.